Do you think Putin wanted to or currently wants to conquer Ukraine and Eastern Europe?
Oh, no, I've never thought that. You know, going back to the Clinton administration, when Putin first became president, at the very tail end of Bill Clinton's presidency, he floated the idea of Russia joining NATO. And Clinton said, yeah, I don't think we really like that.
Of Russia?
Yeah, Russia joining NATO. Because the Soviet Union's gone. We're all friends now, right? The peace dividend we're always talking about. How are we going to spend the peace dividend? Right. We don't need to spend money on defense anymore.
Right.
Hardy har har. So Clinton's like, we don't really like that idea very much. And he said, okay, if you won't let Russia in NATO, at least don't allow any of the countries on our border to join NATO. And Clinton said, that we can agree to. Next thing you know, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland all join NATO. Directly on the Russian border. And he's like, hey, you promised us that you wouldn't let any of these countries join NATO. Sorry. We changed our minds.
Right.
Yeah, strategic planning and all. Then when Obama becomes president, at a summit with Putin, Putin said, I spoke with Clinton years ago about Russia joining NATO. It's something that we would like to explore.
Who said this again?
Putin. To Obama. And Obama said, no, we don't like that idea. We don't think that's going to happen. And he said, okay, well, you guys lied to me about these other countries joining NATO. So don't allow Ukraine to join NATO. This is going to be a serious problem otherwise. And he's like, okay, we won't. And then Joe Biden becomes president, and he's like, oh, Ukraine would be a great addition to NATO and the European Union. And the Russians said, we've had enough. There was a pro-Russian government in Ukraine that was overthrown at the urge of the United States in 2014. As if that wasn't bad enough, as soon as that happens, then they want to talk about Ukraine joining NATO. So the Russians said, we've had enough. That's the background to Ukraine. I don't think that the Russians have any... I don't think that they're expansionist as a matter of policy. They have a history of expansionism, certainly, just like we do. The Chinese do not. But we do, and the Russians do.
But we don't expand that way, right? We expand in a weird way of just gaining influence over the country. We don't make them party. America is not a traditional empire like you look at the British Empire, right?
Correct.
We just have these other countries that depend on us, and we basically control that. We have all the influence in those countries.
Yeah, but then the Libyans would say that's wrong, and the Afghans would say that's wrong, and the Chinese would say that's wrong because of what we're doing with Taiwan now.
It's wrong, and it's wrong that we do it, or it's not true.
Well, it's not true. Look at Libya just as the easiest example. Steve Kappas, who was the deputy director of the CIA, made a secret at the time, not secret anymore, trip to Libya in the immediate aftermath of the start of the Iraq War. And he said, look, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. He's going to die. We know that you have weapons of mass destruction. So you can either give them all to us and we all live happily ever after, or you can die. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And so for only the second time in the history of the planet, with South Africa being the first, Libya voluntarily gave up its weapons of mass destruction program. And then we overthrew him anyway. Hillary Clinton famously said, we came, we saw, he died. What's that? Is our word worth nothing?
Right. What sort of weapons did they have? They had a nuclear program?
They did not have a nuclear program, but they had quite a robust chemical weapons program.
Okay.
And a biological weapons program. But the thing with biological weapons is you can have a BW program just, in your kitchen. Right. You don't need gigantic laboratories or factories for BW like you do for CW. And then you need reactors and such for nuclear.
So What is Russia's concern with NATO? Why should Russia be concerned about NATO?
The Russians really believe that we intend to someday invade them and overthrow their government. They really believe it. That's crazy to you and me.
It doesn't seem crazy.
But they really believe it. And, if you look at it, one of my best friends is also my attorney. He's a former Deputy Attorney General of the United States. And we talk every single day about these kinds of issues. And he told me the other day, very frankly, why the fuck is Montenegro in NATO? Like, are we going to actually, first of all, who's going to invade Montenegro? And even if somebody does invade Montenegro, we're really going to commit our young men and women to, defend to the death the government of Montenegro? Come on.
Right.
He said, if you look at the NATO Charter was to protect member countries against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So why is there a NATO? And in the Charter, it says it was to defend the member countries. So why did we have NATO troops in Afghanistan? Afghanistan's not in Europe, and it's not a member country. Why do we have NATO troops in Syria or in Iraq or in Libya or in the Sahel? And that wasn't even revealed to the American people. That was revealed by accident. Why do we have NATO troops in these countries? They're not being threatened by the Soviet Union. So the Russians see this and they're like, dang, these NATO people, they're willing to do anything. This is frightening.
Why won't any U.S. presidency or anybody in the U.S. consider Russia becoming a part of NATO?
I don't know. I never understood that. Because
if Russia's asking for it, if Putin is asking for it, saying, I want to be friends.
Yeah.
What is the real reason why we don't want to be friends?
I think in part, and forgive me if this sounds overly cynical, but I think in part that this policy is really determined by the defense contractors.
Right.
We live in a permanent wartime economy post 9/11. Our defense budget is bigger than the next 8 largest countries combined. Right? We can't make payments on our national debt, interest payments on the national debt. And we're going to bankrupt Social Security because everything goes to defense. But if we cut the defense budget, it pushed the whole economy into recession.
Right.
So you have to have an enemy to justify a budget like that.
What's this? According to NATO, Russia cannot be considered a partner due to its hostile actions and policies.
Oh, there it is. It's because of its hostile actions and policies.
NATO considers Russia to be a direct threat to the security of its allies, as well as to the stability of peace in the Euro-Atlantic area. So can you explain Chalabi?
Yeah.
And how was he instrumental in all of this? He was like robbing people out of their money. He created like a fake bank at one point.
Man.
And did Cheney know?
Oh, of course he did.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes it an even more interesting story.
Yeah.
So Ahmed Chalabi was one of those very rare Shia Kurds. There are 6 of them, right? He was born in Iraqi Kurdistan, but his family was Shia Muslim. Very, very unusual. He was a bright kid. And so his parents sent him to London to get degrees in finance at the London School of Economics. He ended up moving to Jordan before Saddam became the leader of Iraq. He moved to Jordan and opened a bank there that he called Petrobank. And Petrobank succeeded because Chalabi was able to convince Iraqi refugees to use it as their bank, right? So if you were Iraqi, Petrobank was your bank. You didn't bank anywhere else. So that lasted from the 60s through the 70s through the 80s. And then at the end of the 80s, he literally stole all the money, it was $30 million in deposits, and his secretary smuggled him into Syria in the trunk of her car. He had transferred the money to secret accounts in London and Geneva, and then escaped to Syria, and then flew to London. He owned a magnificent townhouse in Knightsbridge, London, right by Harrods. Magnificent. That today would be worth, $50-60 million. He wore suits that I could only fantasize about affording. But there was something very dirty about him. He was just an awful human being. And he would come on to every female officer that we would go out there and meet with him with. He was just disgusting. So in 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait, and George H.W. Bush says, we got to get rid of this Saddam Hussein. 1990. Well, you can't just overthrow a foreign leader and not have a plan for the next day. And so he said, well, we need to identify somebody that we can install as the new president of Iraq. Well, everybody liked this guy Chalabi. Why? Why do you think people would really like Chalabi more than everybody else? He spoke English. He spoke English as well as you and I. Everybody else is like, if they spoke English, it was heavily accented. They had BO. They didn't shave all the time. But Chalabi, he wears $2,000 Italian suits. He speaks English. He smells nice. Yeah, we like him. We like Chalabi. So the CIA engaged a private contractor by the name of the Rendon Group in Washington, headed by John Rendon. I love John Rendon. Awesome guy.
What kind of contractor?
He's a propagandist. He said to me one time, I said to him, well, what does that mean, actually, that you're a propagandist?
He's a self-proclaimed propagandist? Oh, nice.
And he said, you remember the day that we liberated Kuwait? And I said, I'll never forget it, as long as I live. I went into Kuwait with the Marines on Liberation Day.
Oh, wow.
And he said, everybody in Kuwait was waving a little American flag. I said, yeah, it was like a dream. He goes, where the heck do you think they got all those little American flags? What, they're just laying around?
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that.
No way. That's wild. This is a CIA contractor. Woo! So they picked Chalabi. So John Rendon flies to Vienna, Austria, meets up with Chalabi, and John says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create this new group called the Iraqi National Congress. And what it's going to be representatives of all the different Iraqi opposition groups, right? And you're going to be the chairman of the Iraqi National Congress. So when we finally move into Iraq, you're going to be the president and everybody else will be your cabinet. Okay, that sounds like a decent enough idea. Several problems. Ahmed Chalabi hadn't even been to Iraq since 1965. We weren't even sure if he spoke Arabic anymore. Secondly, all the other people hated him. They're like, Ahmed fucking Chalabi, are you kidding me? Do you people not know who you're dealing with? The answer was no. At the time, we did not know who we were dealing with. The third problem is literally not a single one of these people on the Iraqi National Congress actually lived in Iraq. None of them. If Saddam thought that maybe, perhaps, someday you might possibly become an oppositionist, you're going to get a bullet in the brain. So there were no oppositionists inside Iraq, except the Kurds. And the Kurds are like, we're not working with any of these people. We're going to make Kurdistan and we're going to live happily ever after. And that's where the oil is anyway. So the CIA started funneling money to the Iraqi National Congress, millions and millions of dollars. Okay, they need to buy a building. Where are we going to put this thing? We could put it in Vienna. We could put it in London. We don't want to put it in Washington. It'll be too closely tied to us. So we're trying to come up with different ways to do it. Maybe Vienna is the way to go. Okay, so he spent all the money and he needs more money. Okay, So we gave you $40 million. How much more do you need? Give me another 20 million. Okay, so what have you done with the first 40 million? I spent it. Yes, we know that. What'd you spend it on? All different kinds of stuff. Like what? Where's your building? You must have bought a building with $40 million. I know you bought a new friggin' house in London and a house in Geneva and a Mercedes S600. So where's the rest of the money? He couldn't account for a single dollar of it. Gone. So the CIA issued something called a burn notice. A burn notice is when you send a cable to every CIA officer in the world and say, don't ever have any contact with this person ever again. He's dead to us.
Okay.
That's what we did with Chalabi. So then for the rest...
What year was this again?
Pardon me?
What year was this?
By then it was like 92.
Okay. Got it.
So then we pretty much forget about Chalabi through the 90s. You know, the Iraqis are sort of pissing us off because they won't let the UN inspectors go in, and then Clinton would bomb them, and then they'd do it again, and we'd bomb them again, and nothing was happening. It was just a stalemate. And then George W. Bush gets elected president, and 9/11 happens. And as soon as 9/11 happens, Bush says, we got to invade Iraq. It's their fault. 9/11's their fault. We're like, no, they had like literally nothing to do with 9/11. Well, we're going to invade them anyway. Okay, well, we think this is a mistake, but battle lines drawn, as I said earlier.
Was there no conversations, like real conversations with?
The only conversations were between Cheney, Condi Rice, and Rumsfeld, but mostly Cheney's deputies, Scooter Libby and Addington, and you know, all those guys. Zal Khalilzad.
No one in the CIA could get in Bush's ear and be like, "Look,
we were absolutely preoccupied with Al Qaeda."
Got it. Okay.
Everybody in the building's working on Al Qaeda.
Okay.
And then Bush calls one day and says, "Oh, by the way, come up with an invasion plan because we're going to invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein." We're like, "What? What are you talking about?" But that was it. That was the order. So we decide to invade Iraq, and the CIA says, let's say we do invade Iraq and we overthrow Saddam Hussein. Then what? And Dick Cheney says, we're going to put this fella, Ahmed Chalabi, he's going to be the president. And we said, whoa, no, we are not.
Cheney said that.
Yeah. We have a burn notice on Cheney. I mean on Chalabi, and on everybody associated with Chalabi. We're not working with Chalabi. And then the CIA reissued the burn notice saying, listen, this is from 10 years ago, but just remember, we don't deal with this guy. So what Cheney did is he ordered the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence to secretly reopen a channel with Chalabi. And he specifically told him, don't tell the CIA. I remember, you know, part of my job, or 90% of my job at the time, was reading 10, 15,000 cables a day, 20,000 that were coming in to brief the director. I'd boil that 10 or 20,000 cables down to a half a dozen of the most important issues to brief the director in the morning. And then we started getting these cables like, the weapons of mass destruction are located at these geo-coordinates. I'm like, holy shit, who found this? Super secret, you know, double secret probation kind of special source that nobody can know about. Well, this is a military cable. What sources does the military have? We're the ones that run the sources. Unless this is actually an intercept that they're disguising, which sometimes an intercept is so sensitive that they'll disguise it as something else.
What is an intercept?
NSA catches it out of the air.
Got it.
So I went to my boss. I said, do you know anything about this? You know who this source might be? And he's like, no, it's pretty explosive information. I said, yeah, it could end the war before it begins if we can send the UN inspectors in there. And then we started getting these like every single day. Amazing. Exactly on point intelligence. So a couple of our guys from the Iraq operations group said, we want to talk to the source.
We don't care where he is in the world. We're going to fly a team out there and we want to interview the source. Pentagon said, absolutely not. Too sensitive. We said, no. We're the central intelligence agency, right? At the time, the head of the CIA, his title was DCI, Director of Central Intelligence. He was the DNI. He headed all intelligence agencies, not just the CIA. Now it's just the CIA.
Okay.
But the Pentagon refused to allow us to have access to the source. And then finally, after some pushing and prodding, they admitted it's Chalabi. And we're like, literally not a single word is true. Not a single word. We went to war for this. People are dying because of this. And not a single word of it is true. And so nothing ever came of Chalabi.
Where's he now?
He died a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago.
We were just off camera after the pee break telling the story about how when you captured Abu Zubaydah and he woke up from his coma and saw the SpongeBob shirt, he knew the Americans had him.
He knew the Americans had him, all right.
That was an incredible story. And then, so I remember you took him to the tarmac. They had to put him on a plane, and you didn't have a need to know. You wanted to know where he was going, but they couldn't tell you. And you found out later he was in Guantanamo.
No, I found out years later he was in Guantanamo. He ended up going to a series of secret prisons around the world. Somebody, I don't know who, there's an officer who's been accused of it, but she was never prosecuted. But somebody leaked the existence of these secret prisons back in, I'm going to say it was like 2006 or 2007. The media have reported accurately on the locations of these prisons.
Are these also black sites? These called black sites?
Also called black sites. The CIA has never acknowledged their locations. So I can't say, oh, the prison was here. The black site was there. I can't say it. But all you have to do is Google CIA black sites. It lists them. There have been multiple lawsuits coming out of this program. And in many cases, and this was always fascinating to me, these secret prisons or black sites tended to be handshake agreements between the director of the CIA and the director of whatever foreign intelligence service. In many of these cases, even the prime minister or president of the country didn't know that there was a CIA black site in his country. Isn't that amazing?
That's wild.
Talk about the potential for blowback.
Right.
Just, if I were the prime minister or president of a country and I found this out, I would call the president of the United States and say, who do you think you are? You don't even have the courtesy to tell me that you want to use my country for one of your torture chambers? And in several cases, this led to the collapse of these governments.
Really?
Like, what kind of president are you that you don't even know there's a CIA black site in your country?
Right.
The Americans played you like a fool. Yeah. So it was very controversial at the time.
When you captured Abu Zubaydah and he got shot 3 times in the stomach, the leg, and the groin, that whole story about the hospital going under a barrage of gunfire and calling in a helicopter to get you guys out of there, like, how many years has it been since you captured him?
Almost 22.
22, and he was, do you remember how old he was?
Yeah, to the best of my recollection, he was like 25 or 27, something like that. He was very young. I remember being struck by his youth. I was young at the time. I was 30, let me think, what was I? I was 37.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, wow, this is Al-Qaeda. This is what we're so afraid of. He's just a young guy. One of the most wanted men in the world.
And that was probably one of the most defining moments of your career in the CIA.
Oh,
right?
It was. It was the defining event of my life, really.
What would you say to him if you got to meet him again? And do you think there's a possibility? Would you ever want to go have a meeting with him in Guantanamo and talk to him?
I'd like to. I've spoken to his attorney many times. This is the reason why I'm still talking about this 22 years later. We believed at the time that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, right? he was identified to us by the White House as the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was identified in Time magazine, which was a major publication at the time, as the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. We knew that he had founded Al-Qaeda's safe house in Peshawar, Pakistan, called the House of Martyrs. And that's where people would stay as they were preparing to go to Afghanistan for training, terrorist training. Not only did he establish the House of Martyrs, he also established Al-Qaeda's 2 training camps in southern Afghanistan, in Helmand province and in Kandahar. So we knew this was a bad guy. If you were already in the fight and you wanted to go home, Abu Zubaydah would forge a passport and get you tickets home. If you wanted to join the fight, he would get you to the House of Martyrs and then into Afghanistan. And then from Afghanistan, he would get you to wherever it was you were supposed to go. So this was a bad guy, but he was not the number 3 in Al-Qaeda.
No.
He had never joined Al-Qaeda. He talked about it, but he had never sworn an oath to Osama bin Laden. So he was viewed by bin Laden and by the Al-Qaeda leadership as an independent, sort of a friendly independent.
Like a guy like that bin Laden would give him a wink and a nod of approval. Like,
right.
Okay.
Now, the bigger problem for us at the CIA, and we didn't know this until 2005, was that Abu Zubaydah had a first cousin who was also named Abu Zubaydah. And so that Abu Zubaydah was in Montana. And then when 9/11 hit, he said, oh shit, I got to get out of here. And he ran to Jordan. So our sister agencies are picking up intelligence here, there, and everywhere, out of the air, out of the sky. Abu Zubaydah is in Amman, he's doing this. Abu Zubaydah's in Pakistan, he's doing that. Abu Zubaydah's in Afghanistan. Abu Zubaydah's in Syria. It's like, oh my God, this is a terrorist Superman, right? But it was 2 of them.
2 of them.
2 of them. We didn't know. And so we thought, well, if he's able to move from country to country and he's plotting all these different operations, we got to stop this guy. We know that bin Laden's number 1. We know that Ayman al-Zawahiri is number 2. Mohammed Atef was number 3. We killed him in October of 2001. So that means Abu Zubaydah must be the number 3, right? Because he's out doing all this different stuff.
Right.
And it turned out he wasn't, actually. So, you know, this is what makes this a sad story. And this is why I would be willing to talk to Abu Zubaydah. And this is why I am willing to talk to his attorney. Because, first of all, he was not the terrorist Superman we thought he was. He was a bad guy. So if he was a bad guy, he should have been charged with a crime and put on trial, as the Constitution says that he should. And he should face his accusers in a court of law. Well, we know from the Senate torture report that the CIA will never permit him to be charged in a court of law. And in fact, the torture report tells us that the CIA has made a policy decision that Abu Zubaydah will never leave Guantanamo, ever. And when he does die, eventually, he'll be cremated and his ashes thrown into the Caribbean. So remember, this is a guy who has never been charged with a crime. So why hold him? Right?
What is their reasoning, or what is their explanation for that?
They fucked it up, and they can't let any more get out into the public. Kiriakou was bad enough blabbing that, you know, we tortured him. But then the Senate torture report actually lays it all out, blow by blow by blow, what they did to him. And then if we release him, what, he's going to be on every TV channel in the world talking about the torture that he underwent at the hands of the Americans. The CIA can't allow that.
How old were you when you were the note taker for that meeting with President Clinton and in Greece? Who was the meeting with?
Oh, in Greece, it was with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Defense Minister. And then on the American side, it was the President, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and the Ambassador. I was 30. I had just turned 35.
35. And that was the first time you ever met Clinton, or?
That was the first time I had met Clinton. Yeah.
And what was that meeting like? What was the purpose of that meeting?
It was a meet and greet.
Okay. He didn't go to Greece often, did he?
No. In fact, the only other presidents that have been to Greece have been Eisenhower and H.W.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He specifically came to Greece to apologize for overthrowing the Greek government in 1967. Yeah, which was a major, major deal. I'll tell you a funny story. I used to watch the Greek news every night, right, to practice my spoken Greek. Mm-hmm. And for 2 weeks before Clinton came, they derisively coined a name for him, a title for him. It was Planetarchis. It means the planet ruler. So they wouldn't say O Proedros Clinton, President Clinton. They would say O Planetarchis Clinton, the planet ruler. Clinton is going to come here and grace us with his presence. You know, that kind of thing. Every single night on every news channel, it's O Planetarchis, O Planetarchis. And it would piss me off, right? Then Clinton came and he's like, we love you. You love us. This is the birthplace of democracy. We owe our culture to you. We owe philosophy to you, and medicine and mathematics, language. We owe everything to you. And I want to apologize from the bottom of my heart to the people of Greece for the illegal activity of my government in 1967 to install a military dictatorship here that you have never gotten over. You know, people are still traumatized. As soon as he gets on the plane to leave, right, I put the news on. They're like, wow, we were wrong about him. What a good man. What a kind man. Oh my God, he should be the president of Greece. It was like, It was crazy, the turnaround. It was crazy. But that meeting, I will never forget that meeting as long as I live. Just because I'm standing there, like I can't, there have been a couple of times over the course of my career where I'm in the room and I'm looking around like, I can't believe I'm in this room. Like, surely they're going to figure out that I'm a fraud, right?
Didn't he walk up to you and he was like talking about the hors d'oeuvres or something like that?
Yeah, he offered me, I got there before he did. And when I first got there, the prime minister arrived with his people, and I offered the prime minister a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, whatever he wanted. He said, no, I'm fine. I said, okay. So I'm standing there because, again, I'm the note taker. So my job's not to get comfy on the couch. My job is to stand discreetly with my notebook and take notes. So Clinton comes in and it's all hugs and kisses on both cheeks and slaps on the back. And he asks the prime minister, would you like, we got sandwiches. It was a table of food that went like the entire length of the room. It was ridiculous. $1,000 worth of food on this table. And he didn't want anything. The foreign minister didn't want anything. The defense minister didn't want anything. And the Greek note taker, of course, wasn't offered anything. So then he turns to me, I think I've told you this, and he goes, may I offer you something to eat? And I said, oh, no, thank you, Mr. President, I'm fine. And he goes, oh, are you with me? And I said, yes, sir, I'm with you. He said, I'm sorry, I thought you were Greek. I said, I kind of am, but not really.
It's a long story.
Yeah.
Was Hillary there?
Oh, yeah. What happened was, we finished the meeting. The meeting went about 45 minutes. Not a single substantive word in the whole thing. And Clinton walks out with Berger, who was the national security advisor. Albright, who was the secretary of state, walks out with the ambassador. And then I walk out. So they're standing in the hall. There are two little groups. And I'm standing against the wall. So I'm about 3 feet away from Clinton. Maybe I'm 4 feet away from Clinton. And then he finishes his conversation with Berger. So Berger walks over to Albright and the ambassador. So Clinton is standing like where you are, and I'm standing where I am. And at the end of the hall is the elevator, and the elevator opens, and Hillary and Chelsea get off the elevator. And she's got this mug, you could just tell, like, oh, this is going to be bad. Just the look on her face, like, oh, she was ready to explode. So she walks right up to us. And it's the four of us then. And one thing that I learned very quickly about Bill Clinton is that he absolutely hates silence. He's so gregarious and so outgoing. Somebody has to fill the void.
Right.
With a joke, a story, something.
Yes.
So he says, boy, we sure had a good time at the Parthenon this morning, didn't we, Hill? Silence. She just looks at him with this look like she wanted to kill him. So he repeats himself. And he says, we sure had a good time at the Parthenon this morning, didn't we, Hill? And she says, Jesus Christ, Bill, it rained all day. I'll be in the room. And then she walks between us. And he looks at me. And I'm thinking to myself, you poor man. You have to sleep next to that every night? So he looks at me, he goes, let's get the fuck out of here. And he walks to the elevator. I follow him to the elevator. Secret Service runs down there. We go to the basement. There was this raucous crowd of 500 women in the basement. It was
throwing themselves at him.
Pretty much. It was the Hellenic American Women's Chamber of Commerce. And he gave this rousing, like, amazing speech. There's screaming, we love you, Bill, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know how he did it.
Wow.
I don't know how he did it.
What do you think fueled that relationship, that resentment she had towards him? Or I don't know if it was resentment, but
yeah, this was only a year after the Monica Lewinsky thing. And
a year after.
Yeah, he had humiliated her, and
right.
She had eyes on her own political career by then. She was weighing a run for the Senate from New York. She didn't need him anymore.
Right.
Yeah. And
it's amazing they stayed together all this
It's
time.
amazing. I was friends with the American ambassador to Luxembourg. He's a Greek American who's now the president of some big university. I can't remember now which one. But anyway, he told me the best story. He said that he had been a businessman and a multimillionaire, self-made millionaire. And so he was the head of fundraising for the Clinton campaign for the southeastern United States. And his reward was he was named ambassador to Luxembourg. So he said that when the Lewinsky scandal broke, all the fundraisers got together and called each other and said, he's got to resign. Right? We have to confront him together, and we've got to get him to resign. Gore can become president, and then Gore can run for his own term in 2000. So Clinton agreed to get together, not knowing why they were getting together, but they said that they all needed to see him together. He said they rented a room, a banquet room at the Willard Hotel across the street from the White House on 15th Street. And he said that they had met the night before and they had rehearsed this, that they're going to be strong and they're going to be united, and they're going to tell him that he has to resign, or that none of them are going to raise money for anybody anymore. This is going to be it. They have to resign and make room for Gore. And so he said Clinton finally gets to the room, and before anybody can even say anything, he says, I have wronged you, friends, with this this quivering, almost cry in his voice. And he begs their forgiveness, and he pleads for them not to abandon him, that what he did was wrong, and he's so sorry. He can't believe that he did what he did. Now, like every president, he's a sociopath. This is probably an act. It's probably all made up. You have to be a sociopath to be president. You climb to the top on the backs of everybody else around you. That's just the nature of the system that we have, right? So the ambassador said to me, nobody ever mentioned resignation. He said, by the end of the meeting, he said, most of us were crying. And then somebody started chanting, Clinton, Clinton, Clinton. And that's how it ended. And that's how he walked out, with people chanting Clinton. And I said, he suckered you. He said, of course he suckered us. He knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what we were there for. And he suckered every one of us. He said, but that was that Clinton magic that people used to talk about. And I said, I saw it that day in the meeting. I saw it myself.
He had it beaten out of his hands.
Yeah. I think I told you the story about Carlos the Jackal and Billy, didn't I?
I know that he was the one who captured him, right?
Yeah. It's one of the most exciting stories I ever heard at the agency. Yeah. You know, Billy had a tendency to embellish his stories, not this one.
Really?
Yeah, this one was well documented.
How did that one go down?
Billy was in Sudan working for Kofor Black. Kofor Black was the...
FBI.
No, he was us.
Oh, CIA. Okay,
but he was the senior... The term of art we're supposed to use is the senior CIA officer in country. The CIA does not acknowledge any such thing as a station. So whenever we talk about working overseas, that person was the senior CIA officer in country.
Okay.
So Billy's off one day.
Yeah, you said Kofor Black. For some reason, my brain thought Louis Free. I don't know why. Yeah. Okay.
He's off one day, and he decides to go down to the vegetable market and buy some vegetables for the week. He goes down with a buddy of his, also from the embassy. And, you know, they're the only two white guys in Khartoum, they think. So they're in the vegetable market, and Billy looks, and he's looking at this guy, and he says to his friend, "That's Carlos the Jackal." And the guy's like, "What? No, it's not." And Billy said, "Yeah, that's Carlos the Jackal." "No, I don't think so, Billy." Billy said, "I'm sure it is." They go back to the embassy. Kofor's in his office on a, what do you call this? Elliptical machine.
Gazelle?
Elliptical machine.
Yeah.
He's on an elliptical machine. And Billy walks in. He says, "Kofor, I just saw Carlos the Jackal." Kofor says, "Get the fuck out of here." He said, "No, I'm telling you. I was in the vegetable market and I saw him and I'm sure it's him." And he's like, "Well, I think you're nuts, but if it's Carlos the Jackal, we're going to have to confirm it."
How old was Billy at this time?
Oh, he was in his 70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maniac.
Late 60s, maybe.
Wow.
Yeah. Incredibly great shape. After having been shot more than a dozen times over the course of 3 wars. So he went back down to that vegetable market every single day for a month. And then they saw Carlos again. So what they decided to do was they hired a couple of Sudanese guys to stage a fist fight. In Muslim countries, it's very, very unusual for you to ever witness physical violence between people. People don't, like, you know, we have videos on YouTube of Karens. They load 1,000 new ones every day.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, no. People don't do things like that. So they hired these 2 Sudanese guys that were just down there in the market. You know, you give them $10 a piece and just tell them duke it out. So they duke it out. And of course, everybody forms a circle around them because this is so unusual. And Carlos comes to the circle to watch the fight, and he's like craning his neck to try to get a better view. And Billy's got a camera. Click, 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 click. So he goes back to the embassy. They send the pictures to CIA headquarters, and they say, "Oh my God, it's Carlos the Jackal." Well, Billy had followed him back to his house, so they knew where he lived. And what they ended up doing, I'm not sure how much detail I should get in. They ended up, Carlos had a dental problem. And so what you do is you get the dentist to say, "Hey, time for a checkup. Why don't you come on in?" And then you give him gas. And then when he wakes up, he's on a plane on his way to France.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah, that was Billy. Hero with capital letters. Hero.
Didn't even have to touch the guy.
No.
Just got to his dentist.
Yeah, that's it.
That's incredible.
Sometimes the best operations are the simplest. Billy was one of the most awesome people I ever met at the CIA.
How did you meet him?
He and I did a thing together in I'm going to say the Middle East.
Okay.
It was a couple of months before 9/11. I'll tell you a funny thing. Billy had the filthiest mouth of anybody I've ever encountered in my life. He was just unable to control his swearing. And when you're in the Middle East, these guys are all pious Muslims. They're all cool guys, and they want to hang out, and maybe they'll have a little, glass of wine once in a while. Probably not. But swearing, absolutely forbidden. So we flew out together to train this Middle Eastern service in counterterrorism operations. We were out there for probably a month and a half or 2 months. And Billy was the lead. He was the lead lecturer. And then I would get up for, specific questions, and I was kind of the logistics guy. And I taught the surveillance and surveillance detection portion. So the colonel that was in charge of this unit finally came up to me and he said, "We're friends." And I said, "Yes, we are. What can I do?" And he said, "You've got to talk to Billy." And I said, "Okay, about what?" And he said, "Please, no more MF, no more GD. I'm going to have a heart attack." And I said, "I honestly don't know if it's possible for him to not say those words. I'll try." So I asked him, and he's like, "No can do. Can't do it." And so he just swore like a sailor for the rest of the time. They loved him. Everybody loved him, but he just couldn't control himself. Funny thing too, he used to listen. He used to drive this gigantic Cadillac, and when we were overseas, he rented a Cadillac. I'm like, how did you even find a Cadillac in this country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's weird.
And he would play this one cassette tape over and over. It was Roger Williams with a piano and the deep, baritone.
Yeah.
Big, like Liberace kind of. Mm-hmm. He just loved that stuff.
So, like Billy, I don't remember who told me. I think Rick told me the story. But is it true that Billy was in either Khartoum? I think it was Khartoum, and he was literally following bin Laden and taking photos of him for a long time.
That's true too. The problem there was the Clinton administration wouldn't do anything about it.
Right. He was like, he wanted to take him out, but they wouldn't let him.
There were no criminal charges pending against him. Yeah. And that's because DOJ dropped the ball. The CIA had been telling the Justice Department and the White House since 1991, this is a very bad guy. He means us harm. We need to do something about it. And they're like, yeah, well, we have to wait until he actually commits a crime against an American. And then we'll go to court and we'll file charges. And then 10 years later, we have 9/11. It's like, what have you people been doing for the last 10 years? Now, today, the CIA would send a team and they would take him out.
They would today?
Today, yes. Because post 9/11, there was a revision of Executive Order 12333.
You're saying post 9/11, they would
post
do that.
9/11.
Okay, got it.
But in the 90s, 12333 said, oh, no, you don't. If you are on the phone, on a text message thread, or an email thread, and somebody else on that thread, it doesn't matter who, is a foreign national, you have no expectation of privacy. And the government can intercept everything that you're doing and saying. Now, you've not been accused of a crime. The government hasn't gone to court and said, hey, this Danny Jones guy, we think he's up to something. We need a warrant. No warrant. They just take it. Whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, they just take it. And NSA not just takes it and holds it, they offer it up to the FBI. And they say, hey, we've intercepted these communications. We don't know if they're important or not, but you might be interested in them. And they just turn them over. Well, there are no courts involved in any of this. This all came from the Patriot Act. Another thing now is the FBI, or really any law enforcement organization, has to get a warrant from a court to collect your metadata. Now, you can figure out a lot about a person just from the metadata. Who are you calling? Who are you meeting? Are you calling an abortion clinic? Right? Are you calling a criminal defense lawyer? You don't even need to know what the substance of the conversation is. Just who you're in touch with. Okay, so the FBI, they need a court order, a warrant, to get that information. Actually, they don't. Now they can just purchase it from the phone company or from Twitter or Facebook or Verizon or anybody else, because all of it is bundled and sold. Now, it's supposed to be sold for advertising purposes, but the FBI is not using it for advertising.
Right.
And the Supreme Court's never made any kind of decision on something like this. So why would they go to court and lay out their hand and risk the information leaking to you or to the media when they can just buy it from big tech? And that's what they're doing.
I've heard the argument against this before, or the pushback against this is like when it comes to things like the San Bernardino shooting. And I remember there was a big stink with Apple and the FBI. Apple didn't want to give up the phone.
Absolutely right.
But there's the argument like, look, if the FBI could have had access to this guy's phone, maybe they could have stopped something like that. And if every American, can just be okay with the fact, like, okay, no, the FBI and the CIA, they don't care about what porn you're watching. They don't care if you're cheating on your wife. They don't care about all this, normal everyday sort of like drama. But they need the oversight to be able to weed out people like that and to save people's lives.
Boiling that down, what you're saying is if you haven't done anything wrong, then
you have nothing to
why
worry about. Right.
Do you know who the first person was to offer up that rhetorical question in a public venue?
Who?
It was Joseph Goebbels in 1933. That's what we have to be careful of. That's the slippery slope that we have to stay away from. I haven't done anything wrong. So sure, the FBI can have my stuff.
What was the context of that?
Germans didn't want to report on things that their neighbors were doing.
Okay.
And Goebbels said, why not? If you're not doing anything and they're not doing anything, the information's just innocuous, then what do you care?
That's heavy.
And then they started rounding people up. Now, do I believe the American government's going to round people up? Of course not. Mm-hmm. But what I do believe, and I believe this because of firsthand experience, is if the government decides to target you for whatever reason, they don't like your politics, they don't like your face, they thought maybe you were involved in something else they couldn't get you on, they'll try something else, something different, then there's nothing you can do to protect yourself. Nothing. Now, getting back to the San Bernardino shooter, you're right, they couldn't crack that iPhone, and Apple refused to help them, and it went to court. And Apple won. They ended up turning it over to an Israeli company, and the Israeli company charged the FBI $6 million, and they cracked it. But the information that would have disrupted the attack didn't come from the phone.
Wait, Apple never turned it over to the FBI?
And Apple wouldn't open the phone for the FBI.
Really?
No, they would not. They were staunch about it.
Okay.
In fact, the FBI director complained later that it was $6 million of the taxpayers' money that otherwise didn't need to be spent. Well, actually, yeah. To protect our civil liberties, yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Apple did the right thing. But the information that would have disrupted that attack did not come from the phone. It came from the game system. Have you ever seen the Netflix series Fauda?
No.
Fauda?
No, I haven't.
It is one of the best TV series I've ever seen in my life.
Really?
It's an Israeli series,
I'm
but
write it down while you
sure, Fauda or Fawda, I can't remember. But anyway, it's an Israeli series, but it was made by a group of guys who were former Shin Bet and former Mossad. But it really does give you a balanced view between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It's shocking that they were able to even make something like this. Yeah. Like you're gonna have sympathy for both the Israelis and the Palestinians in this. Like you're gonna want both sides to win, which doesn't make any kind of logical sense. But anyway, in the most recent season, there's this ongoing thing that they do where they only communicate with each other through a backgammon app, right? because the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, the Israelis, the French, the British, everybody's intercepting everything, right? Phones and emails and text messages and intercepting everything. Nobody's looking at backgammon apps. And, all of these game apps that we have, they all have little chat functions when you're playing live.
Right.
I have a backgammon app on my phone. I play against Lebanese and Turks and Syrians all the time. I do. It's fun. And you can chat. So that's how Mossad and Shin Bet communicate with their agents, because they know it's not going to be intercepted. And even if it is intercepted, no human being's ever going to see it. It's just game chat, right? But it's not game chat. It's very serious operational planning. That's what the San Bernardino shooter was doing. He was communicating over like a Wii or whatever it was, a Twitch or Switch or whatever. I don't even know anymore. My kids are beyond that now. Mm-hmm. But that's the danger. The danger is in gaming systems.
Like when it comes to the government looking into like private communications of people, is it just like how much attention are they really paying?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is it just a big catch-all?
Zero attention normally.
Yeah,
it's a big catch-all. NSA built this facility in the desert in Utah, right? And they started building it right after the 9/11 attacks, and there's enough computer memory there to save every phone call, every text message, and every email from every American for the next 500 years, right? That's how much space they have, how much memory they have. No human being is going to listen to 99.9999% of any of that stuff. It's just being vacuumed up by these, Cray computers or whatever those supercomputers are called these days. And it's being held in case someday law enforcement needs to go back to it for leads or for information about a crime that has been committed to build a case.
Okay.
Which is great. Well, it's not great, but if it's not going to be used against somebody
right.
For unethical purposes, I can understand it, provided that they get a warrant.